What's up guys, and welcome to another video. As you may or may not know, the recent patch added a couple of small events dealing with the Elder Dragons, specifically 3 of the remaining Elder Dragons, Primordus, Jormag, and Kralkatorrik. These big badasses want leyline energy, and the leylines for some reason are surging with magic, likely because of Morgemoth's death. Now, the patch really wasn't anything amazing, let's be honest. It was just a couple of events, but that's all it takes. That's all it takes to get the theory craft rolling. That's all it takes to get the mind running. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys about Living World Season 3 and the story in general, which dragon we think we're going to next. Now, some of you might immediately sit there and say, well, is it reasonable to even expect us to go to a dragon? I think so, yes. The release of Guild Wars 2 was about a dragon. The first expansion was about a dragon. It seems likely that the future of the story is also going to focus on a specific dragon too. And maybe we can even touch on the possibility that we'll go to more than one dragon. But last night I was reading some theories, getting the skinny on what people were expecting to happen, and today I wanted to give you guys a sum up of what our possibilities are and what's so exciting about them. So we'll go dragon for dragon, talking about what makes them the best badass and the thing we should most want the next expansion to focus on. So let's start off with my favorite, Primordus, and indeed the first. So the description of Primordus from the Movement of the World back when Guild Wars 2 released is this: Primordus was the first of the ancient dragons to awaken. Calling his servants from their slumber, with his breath he twisted earth and stone, shaping creatures and giving them life. Although the death of the Great Destroyer, his most powerful general, set back the dragon's awakening by 2 generations, Primordus once again rose to create ever more minions far beneath the ground. To this day, he continues to spread his power throughout the deep caverns beneath Tyria. Of the remaining Elder Dragons, Primordus is the only one we've actually seen. This guy's slumber location was featured prominently at the very end of Guild Wars 1, where the Asura had been unwittingly tapping into his magic to power their Asura Gate network beneath the surface. Since then, he's awoken, he's been spreading his influence, forming minions, breathing life into rock and lava, earth and stone, as it says, and his destroyers have been causing mayhem in his stead. But mostly, this has been happening underground. This is why the Asura, for example, are now above ground, because he's wreaking havoc down there. So he's not been super in our face in the story so far. And in fact, even though we know what he looks like, of all the remaining dragons, it's hardest to know where Primordus is, I would say. Or at the very least, what he's fixated on. If this event that's just dropped in the game can show us anything, it's that the dragons still care about magic. For what it's worth, this is now old hat obvious information. It wasn't the most obvious information way back when Guild Wars 2 came out and Zhaitan was the main threat. We only sort of stumbled into this knowledge as the story progressed, and we realized he'd been sending out these corpse fleet ships to assault places around the world and bring back magical artifacts that his minions would then consume. This was a really specific process that we haven't really had much detail on for the other Elder Dragons. It just seems their minions are hustling around leyline energy, and that's it. There's not so much story attached to it. But so then, where is Primordus focused? Where is he located? Is it still at the central transfer chamber, as we saw in Guild Wars 1? Well, maybe not. His minions seem to just pop up everywhere, really. We have some quotes that he's assaulting the Tengu, or the Tengus are at least struggling with the destroyers to some degree, especially when you look at the Renown Heart in Kessex Hills. But then this most recent event is showing a bunch of destroyers spawning at Mount Maelstrom. It's an obvious location to have this leyline surge. I mean, there's a volcano there, there's already a lot of destroyer activity there. But what exactly is Primordus' focus? We don't know. I've always liked the theory of Primordus being so deep under the earth that he's equidistant from everywhere at once, and there's this kind of horror element that he could just cause an earthquake, the ground could erupt beneath your feet and swallow you to destroyers at any moment, but we haven't seen too much of that go on right now. So when we talk about the idea of a Primordus expansion, what does that mean for a race that is threatened, for a locale for us to visit? Does it mean anything, really? I mean, what, we're going to go underground? People will forget quite easily that in Guild Wars 1, we saw the effects of Primordus hitting those even in other continents. Cantha was hit by earthquakes, as was the region of Elona. And this is actually quite important. It means that a Primordus-based expansion could take us, has genuine cause to take us to these regions of the world, especially when you consider that the Asura had Asura gates in those regions, and if we're going to have a dragon and a focused race each time, if the Primordus expansion focuses on the Asura, we can explore those old tunnels and regions beneath the surface that end up taking us through gates that take us perhaps to these other regions that are maybe even still being ravaged by earthquakes and so on. Could be an angle they go with. I think that, personally, Primordus is going to be one of the last ones we fight, as he was the first to awaken, and the story that the devs have set up is that as more Elder Dragons get knocked off, and the remaining one's minions are enabled to feast on leyline energy that surges as a result of this, that last dragon is going to be one big badass. And I want it to be the guy that started it all. The guy who's been awake for the longest, who had consumed magic before the others and woken up anyway, Primordus. Jormag awoke in the lands far beyond the far Shiver Peaks in 1165 AE and moved south, causing the Khodan to flee the icy seas and battling the Norn inhabitants there. The Dragon's Rise caused earthquakes that cracked and shattered the northernmost lands, allowing the icy northern ocean to flood through and create new inland seas. This new inland sea is now inhabited by some refugee Khodan sanctuaries which fled south as they were harried by the claws of Jormag, while Jormag capsized and tore apart many other of the Khodan's iceberg cities in the northern ocean. Alright, so Jormag, unlike Primordus, we have a much more defined, understandable location for him. That would be the far Shiver Peaks, where, again, we're actually hearing this idea of earthquakes, which is fairly interesting. The Jormag-based expansion, if this were what we would get next, would clearly take us here, and there is some justifiable cause for us to go further north. The sad Hall of Monuments, Eye of the North, still standing as an individual tiny little instance way out in the north, I feel like is still a bit of a shame, and at some point the devs would like to expand maps that move around there. It's always seemed that at the very north of Frostgorge Sound, near the Drakkar waypoint, that there is a chance for a future map to be added there, a bit like the Bandit Bridge that's being built in Brisbane Wildlands. That was an awful lot of bees I just said there. So it seems like there is some cause, but I have to say the Jormag story to me seems somewhat stalled. The most recent we heard about the effects of Jormag on the peoples of Tyria was in Living World Season 2, where we saw Newt Whitebear still has a big focus on the Sons of Svanir and the Ice Brood, and this was kind of made him reticent to focus on Morgemoth. But as for actual Jormag activity, we don't really have very much. His minions, just like the others, are focusing on gathering leyline magic and presumably growing in strength, but he's not attacking or threatening in any super overt way that he hasn't been for the past, 100 years since he last was awoke. Having said all this, just because there's not much going on with the man himself, that doesn't mean that his most closely associated race, dare I say, the Norn, haven't got interesting current stories. We, of course, have news of Aersta Galkin's death, the fate of her pet Garm to deal with. We've got the fallout from Bram 2 to look at, and then there are the established legends and ideas of like this giant opening cave beneath Holbrak, and the prophecy that at some point someone will manage to damage the tooth of Jormag, which is still there in Holbrak, and the day that this happens, it will signal to the rest of the Norn that it is time for them to go home. And I think that's where ArenaNet could really blow our minds and really excite us, that we'd suddenly get a Living World patch or something where someone has broken this tooth, and the Norn begin their pilgrimage, and serious talk starts happening. Like, right, we're going back. You know, we've seen that Zhaitan's dead. We've seen that Morgemoth is dead in a sudden fight here. It's the Norn's turn. We want our glory. We're going home, even if it's a huge risk at that. And you'll notice as well, there's quite a big fixation on the Khodan as far as the activities of Jormag. It's not just the Norn, and the Khodan are from areas even further north than we saw in the previous game. And these are also further areas that we could end up going to that could end up being very exciting. It's true that we don't have, say, the Crystal Desert or the Fire Island chain, but when you press M and look at the Guild Wars 2 world map, most of the unexplorable regions are where? To the north, to the domains of Jormag, to these new seas that he has created. And for that reason, I think there's a pretty exciting expansion or Living World chapter in that. Moving on to Kralkatorrik. the third of the 3 dragons who have had some vested interest in this most recent patch. Only a few years ago, yet another dragon erupted from the northern mountains and flew south over the charred territory of Ascalon. The land directly below the path of the dragon's flight was corrupted, becoming a crater of horror. The ground blackened from the dragon's presence, and any creatures caught within the wind of its breath twisted and changed. This is quite old information from the movement of the world. Future explanations of the creation of the brand have been described quite differently to that. But Kralkatorrik is, in my opinion, the most likely for us to go to next. And this may just be because I am so thoroughly excited about the locale associated with him. So, just a moment ago, I was speaking about Erstegalkin's death and how this may have some influence on the Norn and then may, galvanize them into attacking their own Elder Dragon. Well, actually, I think there's another twist to this, and that's that Erstegalkin's death will galvanize the remaining members of Destiny's Edge to take the fight back to Kralkatorrik, because Kralkatorrik was their big failure. It was the breaking of their group. It was the moment that they were brought down a peg, and the moment they were responsible for the death of, Tyria's greatest ally, Glint, and a much-loved character, Snaff. And so I actually think there's a lot of character motivation and character drive for a Kralkatorrik-based expansion. What I can't help but look at right now is ArenaNet's wrestling between 2 core party groups, right, for the Limelight. You originally had the Destiny's Edge, and now we've kind of got our Destiny's Edge 2.0 and the player character involved. And the more time that passes, the harder it's going to be to have Destiny's Edge feel relevant to the story without them fading out and feeling limp. So the way that the devs solved this with Heart of Thorns was they took Destiny's Edge off of center stage by making them get captured by the dragon, and they were always on our mind. It was a rescue mission to find these characters, and then they had importance and they had roles towards the end of the Heart of Thorns story, but that was a valuable escape tactic for the devs. What can they use in future story directions and future expansions? They want these characters to be relevant, but if we're going to take the fight to, say, Prime Orders, for example, it gets a bit harder to make them stay in the picture and stay relevant. But if you take the story to Kralkatorrik straight up right now, and we end up defeating Kralkatorrik in this valiant battle to redeem themselves, you kind of get a nice bookend and a nice ending to the Destiny's Edge stuff, and the devs are much more comfortable at that point to phase those characters out and keep us with Destiny's Edge 2.0, perhaps. I just think there's a lot of character motivation there, and if they leave Kralkatorrik, say, for last because of that, he was the most recent to wake up, so he's the last we kill, excluding the fact Mordremoth was technically the last, but he's already dead, so still. If they did this, there's a chance that, by that point in the story, people just don't really care about Destiny's Edge that much. There's also, for what it's worth, a lot of other hints, and this is where I think that the possibility becomes a much stronger one, in a lot of relevant stories that flirt with that region of the world, the Crystal Desert. We have heard so much lately about Ascendancy, and as well the Zephyrites, who right now are just kind of hanging in a weird place. Their story's just stalled. Oh, we got shot down at the over dry top, and okay, what are we doing next? There's been so much of that stuff that it's just good storytelling to now take the players to this area that they've been hearing so much about recently. And there have been some great theories born out of this too, like the theories that Snaff is still alive, the mystery of who this character was that gave the Master of Peace the egg, the fact that Glint came from, or, roosted in the Crystal Desert, and it's her offspring now that we're dealing with center in the story. Glint's legacy in Heart of Thorns was quite clearly explained to not just be this egg, but to be plenty more things she set up around the world. The Forgotten have been mentioned, and the Forgotten's last known location on Tyria was the Crystal Desert. Speaking about other stories which are remaining relevant, let's not forget that the guild halls are built around these large crystals that keep growing in size. The devs keep talking about this relationship between crystals and magic, and we've clearly seen through Mordremoth's minions that the dragons want to get these crystals in the guild halls. This is why they congregate around those areas when we originally defeat them. And where would we go into? A place full of crystals, the Elder Dragon of Crystal in the Crystal Desert. The Crystal Desert is a fan favorite location just for what it was in Guild Wars 1-2, and even when you look at something like the movement of the world, and the fact that Palawa Joko's been held at bay from wrestling with dragon minions, Zaitan's obviously not that dragon anymore. Could it be the branded? Could this be an opportunity to bring Palawa Joko and then finally move us further south to another continent, something many players have also been asking for? I just think there's a lot of really strong reasons why people might want to go to the Crystal Desert. Its proximity to Ore, and this idea that you'd actually be able to travel from Ore through the Scavenger's Causeway and into a new region as well is a much loved thing people have wanted. I think that this is a place that the devs would really like to go, and makes Kralkatorrik a fantastic candidate for continuing the story, and I think it's where we're most likely to go. So, with all that said, there are a couple of other things to entertain, and one of them is Elder Dragon number 4, the mystery man himself, Steve. Bubbles, whatever. The Elder Dragon with a name that begins with S. So, the description from the Movement of the World on this one is, in the deepest waters of the sea, another dragon breathed, twisting the waters themselves into tentacled horrors that rose from every lake and river of the land. Now, that description, we never actually have seen that happen in-game, or heard of that actually happening in-game. Don't forget, the Movement of the World was written a long time ago. It was sort of guiding lore for the setting of Guild Wars 2 that they've stuck to, but some things have been ended up slightly different. We don't actually have any real examples of tentacles coming out of lakes and things, but Steve hasn't been shied away from. It's not like the devs are ignoring his existence completely, though he isn't impacting us on Tyria, though we can only say he's in the sea, which to be honest isn't much better than, oh, he's underground, as we have with Primordus. He has had a look in Season 2 of The Living World. We got this information that the first letter of his name was an S. In the Heart of Thorns story, we had his minions have some showing in a cool little Easter eggy way in one of the Forgotten Trials, where these pools of salt water randomly appeared in the room. Steve is still an element of the game. Looking slightly outside of the game, we're seeing the concept art on the Heart of Thorns release page of this massive Hydra tidal wave attacking Lion's Arch, something that maybe they were alluding to again with the Black Lion weapon skins in a very recent patch. Is he going to be the next expansion or huge Living World chunk, though? I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see a priority focus on Steve, not in the near future, maybe not ever. I think you best use this character as a sudden twist and turn of events just when things seem to be going good. They've already set up this kind of crazy idea that Elder Dragons suddenly seem far too easy to kill, especially with the Morgemoth story. And so to put us rapidly in another expansion where it looks like very quickly we're going to kill another Elder Dragon, but then Steve shows his face and suddenly freaks everyone out and is like complete 180 as these two dragons manage to escape somehow as they do battle in the chaos. I think that that's a really exciting way to use Steve rather than making him some big focus. The idea of an underwater themed expansion just in general, I don't think works. I think he is the greatest enigma, just from like a storytelling perspective. If I was in the writer's room with the devs, I'd be very curious to hear how they plan to tackle this challenge of this big enemy. Of course, there's the ideas that he might be good as well in the end. And not only this, but beyond Steve, we of course do have the idea of a multi-dragoned expansion. I have already seen a few people in my comments very quickly saying, oh, you know, they might just do them all at once. This latest event that's been jumped in the game, this shows that all three dragons are vying for power. Maybe they're just trying to whiz out of the story. Some people obviously don't like the Elder Dragon story, don't find them particularly convincing as villains or as powers in the world, and so maybe ArenaNet just want to zoom us through it. I don't think we're ever going to see a multi-dragoned expansion where we kill more than one or do battle with more than one at once just because the devs want to get the story out of the way with really quickly. I think if we see that happen, it'll be because they think it's going to be cooler and they think that they can tell that story really well. But will we get all three or even all four of the remaining dragons all in the next expansion? I think it's unlikely. I think we'll probably get one more expansion dealing with one dragon, and then maybe the expansion after that will be a battle where we deal with all the rest all at once. It is true that the devs are struggling, I would say, with this problem where they've got a game and a really cool story of these dragons applying constant pressure to the races of the world. But really, when we get in there, it just feels like the dragons are waiting their turn to die. And it's got so much worse now that we've done it with both Zaitan and Morgemoth, and it's a difficult thing to escape. Doing more than one dragon at once allows you to escape that. And there's a really justifiable, easy way to push the story in that direction too. All you have to do is look at the remaining Elder Dragons, realizing that, oh god, hold on, Zhaitan just died, and then moments later, Morgemoth died. Morgemoth was super powerful, and he seemed to just win the battle straight up, destroying all these packed fleet ships. And then a matter of days later, he just crumbles in his own mind and dies. That's scary stuff if you're an Elder Dragon. You have any sense of intelligence about you whatsoever. So perhaps this is what spurs the remaining Elder Dragons to go into a fight. And don't forget, they are getting stronger from Morgemoth's death, from Zhaitan's death. They are getting more magic. We've seen countless times in this franchise that taking on too much power, you can lose control of it. In fact, one of the most contemporary stories, nothing to do with the Elder Dragon, so it would seem right now, but over in the raids with the White Mantle and so on, we're seeing a boss, Matthias, who gets too much magic and loses control. This is a common idea in the franchise, and as the remaining Elder Dragons feast more, maybe they're going to get more rage-induced, maybe they're going to get more aggressive, maybe they're going to push into each other's territory much faster, and finally the devs will be able to use this very quick speed of the plot to their advantage and really make it feel like there's a lot of pressure. I think, personally, the best way that we'll go forward is the next expansion focuses on a single Elder Dragon. In summation, I would say that's got to be Kralkatorrik. That would be my favorite place. And as they push into this territory, the devs keep the other Elder Dragons seriously center stage. We're not going to destroy them in the next Living World batch and expansion, but these other Elder Dragons will have a sincere role to play in the stories, even though we're in the Crystal Desert, and that allows us to very comfortably move into those plots after this next expansion comes out. So that'd be my idea. That would be how I hope the ArenaNet go forward, seeing them tackle this problem of how do we build a story where all these Elder Dragons feel like they're doing stuff instead of just waiting around to die. That's going to be very interesting to see. But I wonder what you guys think. I'd love to hear your theories as well. It's wonderful when new content comes out and we have things to talk about, right? It's absolutely fantastic. Thanks, guys. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Going to be heavy spoilers here, as the title obviously let you know, and what I want to discuss today is where Heart of Thorns will go in the future. Namely, I'm looking